everyone, how are you doing today? ABH just released the Norvina palette, and when I heard of its release, I went ahead and swatched all the purples in my collection in an effort to kind of justify to myself the purchase or the lack of it of the Norvina palette. But after I swatched all the purples, I was able to put together this dupe, and I was also actually able to create this look using the shadows that are there in my dupe. I hope you guys are excited, and I can't wait to share what shades are there in this dupe. Before we go any further though, I should say that the beauty of any eyeshadow palette is in its collection. It is not necessarily in the individual shadows, but when someone puts a collection together, it kind of gives you ideas, it kind of inspires, looks. So never underestimate the power of a palette. I feel like I personally wouldn't be able to just pick out all the shadows individually and combine them the way one is able to combine if you see them together in a palette. Having said that, I have two versions of this dupe. In the first version, I have shadows that are perfect matches, but some of those shades exist for me in palettes, which means, I can just pop them out and take them with me. And for that reason, I have put together a second version or other options per se, where all the shadows exist in the single pan format. And if you are interested in just a couple of shades, or if you're missing just a couple of shades, you should be able to just pick them up, based on my dupe number 2. So how we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead, read the description that's given for the Norvina palette shadows. I'll tell you about my exact dupe, and then I will give you other options as well. Okay, so the first shadow in the palette is called Dreamer, described as shimmery beige. And according to me, the perfect dupe is this Shop Miss A shadow called Fizz 6237. And this was a part of the Date Night palette. The other option I have is a Take It Slow shadow by ColourPop. And another shadow I have in the BH Cosmetics Studio Pro palette, the second row first shadow, or the fifth row third shadow. There are very, very subtle differences in these shadows. However, I feel like once they are on your lids, you won't be able to tell. The next shadow is called Summer, described as cooler toned shimmery bronze. And the dupe for that, I think, is this fifth row fifth shadow in the Studio Pro palette. And I think this comes very, very close. However, the other option you have is an Ofra shadow called Gold Rush, or a NYX shadow called Liquid Gold. It's a prismatic shadow. The Ofra shadow is a little bit more goldeny. The NYX shadow is a little bit reddish, you can say. I think these two should work, but when I hold the swatches right next to the swatch that is provided by Anastasia Beverly Hills, I think the shadow in the BH Studio Pro palette comes the closest. The next shadow is called Wild Child and is described as duochrome cool toned pink. Another description found in another blog was light pink with a silver shimmer, and I thought the closest dupe I could find was in the Studio Pro palette because of the silver shimmer. It's the third row fourth shadow. I'm very sure there should be more dupes of this in the Galaxy Chic palette as well, but I thought this was the closest. The other option I have is an Ulta shadow called Beauty Junkie. However, this is a little bit more purple tone, but this is also duochrome and has a slight pink shimmer to it. Now, as you can see, this is more pinky. This is kind of, less so. The third option I have is an Iced Pigment by LA Colors. I did show you guys swatches of all the iced pigments that I have. Honestly, I feel like this is the prettiest shadow among all three. However, I thought this came the closest to the swatches provided by ABH. The fourth shadow is called Rose Gold and is described as cooler toned shimmery rose gold. Now, this shadow I had the hardest time finding a dupe for, not because I couldn't find a rose gold shadow, but predominantly because the swatch looks kind of peachy sometimes and less goldeny. However, a lot of shadows I have are pretty golden. So the options I have are High Strung from ColourPop or Heat by NYX. However, I think what works best is actually layering these two so that it becomes peachy like once they're in the swatches. But the shadow in Norvina palette is further cool toned and I wasn't able to find a dupe for that. The next shadow in the Norvina palette is called Celestial and is described as multi-dimensional cool toned violet. Now I have a lot of multi-dimensional cool toned violet shadows, but the closest as the swatch goes is this Ulta shadow called Majesty. It doesn't look like much in the pan. It's one of their older pans as well. And honestly, pigmentation wise, I don't like it, but it's the closest I could find in color. And then the other option I have is a NYX shadow called Volatile. This is slightly warmer and slightly more pink toned. I personally like this shadow better because of its shine. I really, really like NYX prismatic shadows. The sixth shadow in the top row is called Dazzling, described as shimmering taupe. Now, to be honest, to me, Dazzling and Summer look very, very close to each other. The closest dupe I could find was again in the Studio Pro palette. It's the fourth row Lash Shadow. This is a beautiful kind of grayish taupey shadow with golden shimmer in it. It's beautiful. The other option I have is another NYX prismatic single called Bedroom Eyes. I received this one in one of my Ipsy bags. Now, this one is a little bit more goldeny and less, like this one has a slightly more reddish tone, and that's why I chose it as my perfect dupe. However, I think Bedroom Eyes is a pretty shadow, comes very close as well. Drama is described as shimmery deep aubergine. Now, I have a few shadows that come very close, but I think the closest is a shadow in Nubian 2 palette called Layla. And another option exists in the Studio Pro palette, third row Lash Shadow. Now I couldn't really choose between the two, but both are just super beautiful. One is a little bit deeper, one is a little bit more burgundy, but actually if you combine the two, I think you get the best dupe. Now besides those two shades, I have two more single shadows in my collection. This one is by Tarte, it's called Revel, and this one is by Anastasia Beverly Hills called Enchanted. And I feel like if you combine the two, you should be able to get a perfect dupe. If not, both of these are these like very, very high shine, beautiful shadows. Now the entire bottom row of the Norvina palette is supposed to be mattes. The first shade is called Base, described as matte neutral eggshell. The perfect dupe for that would be the shadow Say What from Ulta Beauty, and also a third row first shadow from the BH Studio Pro palette. Another option you can use is this Shop Miss A shadow called Sultry. This is a little bit more brownie shadow, but if you are of my skin tone, this would work better actually as a base shade for you. The second shadow is called Soul, and it's described as matte deep periwinkle. I have a very close dupe in my collection, and it's called Aubergine by NYX. It's a hot single shadow. I think this is slightly deeper, but on my skin it looks the same, honestly. This particular shadow has a very slight pinky shimmer in it. It's a very, very beautiful shadow. The shadow in the Norvina palette is a little bit more on the pastel side, and it's a pure matte. However, when I held my swatch against the swatch that was released by ABH, I couldn't tell a difference. I'm actually very glad that I have this in my collection. It's a beautiful shadow. Even if you're not trying to do the Norvina palette, if you are just interested in purples, that's a good shadow to have in your collection. Alright, the next shadow we have is called Incense, and it's described as matte mid-toned taupe brown. I have two options for that. The first one is an Ulta shadow called Master Plan, and the second one is called Dance with the Tides from NYX. This NYX shadow is a little bit less red. The next shadow is called Love, described as matte cool toned pink. Now the dupe for that I have is a NYX matte single called Daphne. Now it does look a little bit deeper in the pan, and the shadow that's in the Norvina palette is more pastel. Another option I have is actually a balm blush that we got in an Ipsy bag. However, this is more pastel than what's there in the palette. And the third option is very bright. It's called Wild Orchid by NYX. But if you're looking for a more brighter pink, that would be your option. The fifth shadow in the bottom row is called Volatile. It's described as matte violet gray. The best option for that I have is again by NYX, matte single called Late Night Lingerie. This is another beautiful deep purple that I would highly recommend picking up. But for options, I have Enigma. This is by Shop Miss A. It came in the same date night palette. This is a little bit more red toned. And one more option, which is more pastel, is called Plum Pop. And this is by Ulta Beauty. This can be built up. However, this is definitely more red toned. The second to the last shadow in the palette is called Eccentric. It's described as matte dark squash or a yellow brick. I initially thought it looked more orangey, so I had picked out like this shadow. However, I think it is closer to this one. This is called Not Today by NYX. Let me swatch the other orangey shadow too. This one is called Frisky, again by NYX. And I have a slightly more reddish version called Spicy, and this one is by Shop Miss A. And then the final shadow is called Passion and is described as matte dark plum. And for the perfect dupe, I have a shadow called Skinny Dip, and the other option I have is an old Essence shadow called Keep Calm and Berry On. So here are my swatches actually again. I'm trying to see how I can show you that without like falling off the chair. I can't, but I think I'm pretty pleased with it. This is one of the looks that was in the Anastasia website. I have the Not Today shadow all over my lids. Just under my brow bone, I have the Say What shadow from Ulta Beauty so that I could blend out the Late Night Lingerie from NYX underneath very, very lightly. I have taken Aubergine on my lower lash line. Sorry guys, I can't seem to find the exit portion of my video, but here are the final swatches for you. I hope you guys like this dupe. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know what your thoughts are about the dupe and about the Norvina palette. Thanks again for watching. Bye!
All right.